Behind the story of how the media really works, how the news gets made. Welcome to our viewers here in the U.S. and live all around the world on CNN International. This hour, D.C.'s new political odd couple, President Trump and the press, with Trump aides rethinking daily White House briefings. Outgoing Press Secretary Josh Earnest and the head of the White House Correspondents Association are both here with reaction. Plus, an exclusive interview with former State Department official Richard Stengel about Russian hacking and the rise of disinformation. But let's begin with divided America, divided about the facts. Journalists are wrestling with how exactly to respond when President-elect Trump, the next leader of the free world, says and tweets things that are just false. Here's something he's been saying for months, including on Thursday at a rally in Pennsylvania.
We have to be a rich nation again, and we have to be a safe nation. The murder rate in the United States is the largest that it's been in 45 years. Nobody knows that. They don't tell you that. Do you guys ever say that? No, they don't say that. They don't want to hear that.
Listen to those boos. Trump's making this sound sinister, like the press is refusing to tell you about a terrible crime wave. But the reason we in the press don't report it is because it's not true. The murder rate is thankfully at near 45-year lows. And now it is correct to say, here's the data from Vox, that there has been an increase in the murder rate recently. Between 2014 and 2015, it did tick up percentage-wise. But it's an increase from this relatively low level, much lower than in the 80s or 90s, for example. Now, Trump got this wrong many times during the campaign. What was so interesting about last night at the rally he most recently had in Mobile, Alabama, was that he got it right at first, then got it wrong again. Listen to this.
The murder rate has experienced its largest increase in our country in 45 years. Think of it. The murder rate. More people are being murdered than in 45 years. And the press never tells you that. Do they ever write that? No.
So he got it right at first, but then said more people are being murdered than in 45 years, which is completely untrue. All of this raises a real problem for journalists. How do you cover a say-anything president? Joining me now, Angie Drobnic, Holan, the editor of PolitiFact, Jane Hall, a journalism and media studies professor at American University, and Jeffrey Toobin, CNN's senior legal analyst and staff writer at The New Yorker. Angie, I'm so interested in this one specific example of a falsehood. It's important, I think, to drill down and just find one we can talk about that's very specific. I know that he's keeping you very busy at PolitiFact. What do you believe journalists should be doing, trying to get the facts out there when Trump will repeat something like this again and again?
Well, this is something we've noticed him doing through most of the 2016 campaign. I would say by now we're somewhat used to it. And the approach that we take is we write our reports. We focus on correcting misinformation. So when we are fact-checking something, we focus in on what's wrong and we say why it's wrong. Now, we can note that he said it right a few seconds ago, but this other thing is wrong. And the other thing that we focus on is the overall impression that an average viewer would get. And I think in this case, the average impression they'd get is that crime rates are worse than they've been in 45 years, and that's not right.
What do you recommend, Jane, to your students at American University? What do you recommend to journalists watching this program wrestling with this problem? Because like, on one hand, it's simple, right? You correct him every time he says something wrong. On the other hand, it's actually quite difficult. It's hard to do in copy when you're writing a story. It's hard to do on television when he's live. What do you recommend?
Well, you know, I have former students who are covering Donald Trump, and I think they've done some very good work. So this is real to me, and certainly calling out reporters and calling them scum and all of that is also real. I think what you have to do and what journalists have to do is put the facts in the story. For example, his cabinet appointments, to say the man that he wants to run the EPA is a person who's been suing the EPA, and you let the reader decide. I mean, that is the biggest chestnut of reporting, but it is true. I do think that one thing that journalists need to think about not doing is retweeting his every tweet. We are not supposed to be a tweet deck for Donald Trump. And I think that sometimes people get into the idea of they have to contradict immediately what he just said that's not true. And there's value to that. But I think sometimes we need to point out, A, we need to not necessarily retweet and talk about on every talk show what he just said, because that plays totally into his hands. the thing that I think we maybe want to say sometimes is we are doing this job because we are to be a force for the American people. He has so demonized the press that I think that is a very dangerous thing to do. We need to point out the facts, but we also need to point out, hey, we're there for you, not just because we want to go to watch Donald Trump have dinner with Mitt Romney. We're there to do a job for the American people. Somehow he's been very successful at saying something other than that.
I was going to pull up a tweet next, but I'll skip that for now. I mean, Jeffrey Toobin, we're talking about this dynamic here. Ultimately, it's about alternate realities, people accepting an alternate reality, not caring if Donald Trump gets these facts wrong. Do we, in the media world, come across as too high and mighty sometimes, talking about this issue?
Well, I think we are widely disliked. I think that's something that really, is very much part of the story. It is no coincidence that, Donald Trump gets cheers when he points to the press, as he did at virtually every campaign rally. And I am a lowly reporter. I don't know how to persuade people that we are not as horrible as Donald Trump says he is. All we can do is keep telling the truth. And if people don't like it, ultimately that's going to, we're a business, and people are not going to read us. They're not going to watch us.
Well, viewing this as a former prosecutor, is he prosecuting a case against the press essentially?
I don't think so. Donald Trump is a politician who was trying to get elected, and he found a vehicle to do it. And one way he ran that vehicle was with attacks on the press, which turns out to be very popular with his base. Also, I don't think we should overstate the problem. I mean, people who attend Donald Trump rallies are not the United States of America. Hillary Clinton got 2.5 million more votes than he did. People are still watching the news. People are still reading the news in one form or another. So it is not the entire country that has turned against the news media, but there is no doubt that we have a problem with a very significant group of people.
A problem in terms of trust, but Angie was suggesting that when someone repeats something enough times, like for example, the murder rate's at a 45-year high, that a lot of folks start to believe it's true. That's not a problem in credibility for the press. That's a problem in the communicator, in this case, President-elect Trump.
Well, and all we can do when he says that is say that it's not true. And it is not our job, I think, to insist that people believe us. I mean, we're not in a contest. We're not running against Donald Trump. All we can do is tell the truth. And when he says thousands of people were cheering, Muslims were cheering after 9/11 in New Jersey, we said it was false. It continues to be false. But if people believe it, we can't grab them by the collar and say, don't do that. We can only use the tools at our disposal.
Trump, of course, communicating emotionally. Jane, let me show you the reason I was originally thinking about this issue this week. Trump's been communicating emotionally throughout the campaign and now throughout the transition. Journalists are generally trained not to communicate emotionally, to keep our emotions out of it, and so his emotional messages do resonate. We have to rethink how we write and cover and talk about him. Here's what she said, and then I want to hear you react.
The presumption has been always that the president is telling the truth anymore. Even today he tweeted something that was just factually inaccurate. So that does change how you approach this presidency, from reporting it out.
So, Jane, your reaction to that is something fundamentally different now.
Well, I think something is fundamentally different, at least as far as he has been until he takes the oath of office. And we can't assume he's going to be any different. So I think it's very awkward for journalists, as Jeffrey was saying. We're not used to saying he's a liar. We're not used to saying that about any politician. And I think it puts us in a very awkward position because his supporters will say, oh, yes, of course, that's the liberal media. I think one of the things that really is new is how much access is he going to have. That, I think, is the only card that the media can play, which is we need to have press briefings. We need to have a press pool because this man has already already taken the tack that he has the right to respond in real time to something he thinks is unfair. That, to me, is even scarier, actually, because we've never seen that before. That is unprecedented.
And I think that's, that's an important point, is that, these press briefings, they're not for the benefit of the press, by and large. They're for the benefit of the White House. The White House gets its message out every day. The White House wants to do that, and Donald Trump is going to want to do that as well, and he can't do it entirely through tweets. Yes, it is true that the White House press corps likes to ask impertinent questions sometimes, but it is mostly the White House press secretary getting out the mission of the message of the day. So I actually don't think there is much chance that briefing is going to go away, at least in any significant way.
And more on that in just a moment. Talking about access, Donald Trump, like other politicians, provides access when it's in his interest. Here's a headline from the Politico website over the weekend, a pretty shocking story saying that Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, told a group of business executives, quote, not a quote here, but paraphrasing, we struck a deal with Sinclair for straighter coverage. Now, Sinclair is one of the biggest owners of local TV stations in the U.S., owns many stations in important swing states. What this story is saying is that Sinclair struck a deal with Trump to have interviews with the candidate without commentary, without fact-checking. Jane, I want to get your assessment of this story, how much this matters, because Sinclair says, hey, we offered the same deal to Hillary Clinton. In fact, I've seen the emails from Sinclair executives to Clinton's campaign asking for interviews and being turned down.
Well, I think it's a complicated question. Sinclair has a huge penetration of stations, as you said, and, if Hillary Clinton didn't take them up on that, bad on Hillary Clinton. I think that, I think it's a complicated story. People have said Hillary Clinton didn't provide the same access. I think Donald Trump benefited greatly from the media, which is one of the great ironies of his now attacking the media,
as you say. This moment right now, right. And Jeffrey Toobin, one more point, one more story to show on screen. Your column for the New Yorker, your piece for the New Yorker this week, all about the Hulk Hogan-Gawker trial. Of course, Hulk Hogan winning, Gawker losing and going into bankruptcy. You suggested that you wrote here in the piece, Hulk Hogan's smashing legal victory earlier this year shows us that publishing the truth may no longer be enough. Briefly, why does this matter in the Trump age? What does this signal for future lawsuits against the press?
Well, that case, to summarize, was about Gawker running a sex tape. Hulk Hogan having sex with his best friend's wife, and he filed a lawsuit charging a violation of his privacy, not libel, but privacy. And basically what a court had to decide was, is that information newsworthy? Not whether it was in good taste or bad taste or true or false, newsworthy. And once we get in the business of allowing juries and judges to pick what's newsworthy, that gives a lot of leeway that traditionally had not been in the province of the courts. And when you operate in an environment where the press is not pushed Gawker out of business with a $150 million award.
All this distrust of the media is actually hurting the media, hurting newsrooms when they have to go to court.
Right, and Gawker running a sex tape is not where the press wants to fly its First Amendment flag. I mean, it was a very debatable proposition in the first place. But when you consider who Hulk Hogan was and how he had been talking about his sex life and the size of his penis on television, on radio, whereas that a guy like that could force an established business like Gawker out of business with a lawsuit, that really does raise questions about letting jurors decide what's newsworthy in an age when people don't like the news media.
And Hogan's lawyer is also now Melania Trump's lawyer. So I highly recommend the piece on the New Yorker website.
It is very much one ecosystem. The lawsuit was financed by Peter Thiel, the tech entrepreneur who was one of Trump's biggest supporters. So the overlap is considerable.
Jeffrey, thank you very much. Jane, thank you very much. Angie, please stick around. I wanted to ask you about PolitiFact's Lie of the Year, so let's do that later this hour. Coming up here next, talking about press access at the White House. Hear from Josh Earnest, the outgoing press secretary, in an exclusive interview with me right after the break.